A very warm welcome to lesson number 23 in our 50-part series on the law of evidence. In today's lesson, we will acquaint ourselves with the concept of admissions and confessions and as to how they are made relevant under the Indian Evidence Act. Before we look into the sections relating to admissions and confessions, I want to clarify one very important, fundamental and foundational point. Let us take an example. Let me take the example of the word date. Now, if I ask you the meaning of the word date, then you realize that it has multiple meanings. The first meaning would be the dry fruit that we are all familiar with. That's a date. The other meaning could be that which refers to the date on the calendar. So, for example, the 8th of December, for example. There is also a third meaning, and I'm sure you're familiar with that already. But the point that I'm trying to make is that the same word can have multiple meanings in English, right? So, whether date has been used to refer to the fruit or whether date has been used to refer to the calendar depends on the context. It depends on the adjoining words. The same thing happens with the word admit or admission. So you understand that the word admit and admitted and admission are related to the same root, right? They're all related to the word admit. But the word admit has two meanings with which it is used in the Indian Evidence Act. This is a very important point. You must not confuse this. The word admit is used with two distinct and unrelated meanings. These are not related meanings, these are absolutely unrelated meanings. Like, for example, the date, the fruit, and the date that you have on the calendar, these are just completely independent of each other. It's just the spelling that is the same. So when we look at admissions, it has been used with two meanings. We will have a look at those. The first meaning, let me give you a few examples. You're aware of the word or the phrase admit card, which you used before going into your examination hall? That uses the word admit. You've also said that you want to gain admission into a university. That's again the same meaning. You can also say that evidence was admitted. Now, I have said this several times over in the past. Evidence was admitted or not admitted, admissible, inadmissible. All of these deal with the first meaning of the word admission, which is kind of like allowing entry, right? So when I say admit card, what does that mean? When you have an admit card, it means you can get admitted, you can get entry, you would be allowed. Likewise, when a person or a patient gets admitted into a hospital, it means he was admitted to the hospital, which means he was brought into the hospital. Similarly, admission into a university means you're getting into the university. Likewise, when we say that evidence was admitted, it means that it was accepted by the court. It gained entry into the court, right? So evidence was admitted, and then of course it is followed by the stage of appreciation. So this is the first meaning, which basically means allowing entry, gaining entry. That is what the first meaning of admission is. And you must realize that admit, admission, admissibility, all of these are related to the word admit, which has the first meaning, which is that there is entry. Now we look at the second meaning of the word admit or admission. Let me give you an example. I admit that I am wrong. Let's take another example. His admission was recorded by the magistrate. Facts admitted cannot be proved. Perhaps you remember that we have discussed this in section 58 already. So what you see here, these three meanings are again the second meaning. These three usages here refer to the second meaning of admission. And here, admit kind of means that you concede, right? You say, okay, I agree that I made a mistake. You concede. you accept what has been said to you, right? So when you make a statement that I admit I was wrong, then you're conceding that you went wrong. Remember that these two meanings are very different. So when we talk of admissions and confessions, as we are in today's lesson, then we are using that with the second meaning. So whenever you see admissions and confessions, we are dealing with the second meaning, right? Admissions and confessions. So when you say somebody's admission was recorded by the magistrate or by the doctor or whoever, by the police, whatever, that refers to the second meaning. When you say I admit my guilt, it is the second meaning. When we say that facts admitted need not be proved, it is the second meaning. So in today's lesson, when I talk of admission, I am talking about the second meaning of admission. So I hope that is clear. Make sure you always remember this distinction. Do not use them interchangeably. So when you look at chapter 2 of the Indian Evidence Act, you'd find that admissions are mentioned between section 17 and section 31. So you must remember that whenever you see admissions in these sections, in the provisions here, it is being used according to the second meaning of the word. Now, what is the meaning of an admission? I'll start off simple. An admission is basically a self-harming statement, which means that when a person makes an admission, then it works to his own detriment or to his own loss or to his own disfavor, right? So if you say, I admit I'm a great person, that's not an admission, because an admission is supposed to be to your own loss or to your own disfavor, right? So that's basically what an admission is. It is not an accurate definition of admission. We will see that eventually, but for the time being, this gives you an idea of what an admission is. Likewise, I want to introduce to you the other word that is called confessions. A confession, like an admission, is also a self-harming statement, right? So both admissions and confessions are self-harming statements. However, a confession is a more severely harming statement, right? When you have a confession, it harms the person more severely. It inflicts greater self-harm than an admission, okay? So confessions are dealt with between sections 24 to 30. As you can see, admissions are 17 to 31 and confessions are 24 to 30, which means that confessions are dealt with within the topic of admissions. Let me clarify this a little more. Let us try to understand this through a diagram. So when we talk of statements, we'd already discussed one kind of statements, which is self-harming. So self-harming statements are those statements because of which somebody suffers detriment or loss by making them. What is the opposite of self-harming statements? The opposite is self-serving statements. What that means is that the person who makes a self-serving statement is benefited by making one such statement. He profits from it, or you can say that self-serving statements favor the person who makes it. Now, within self-harming statements, some statements are admissions. Now, I want to caution you at this point that this diagram is not 100% correct, okay? It is an approximation. It is almost right, but not 100% right. I will tell you in the forthcoming videos as to why it is not fully precise. But for the time being, let us believe that this diagram is correct so that we can understand the concept. So, admissions are always self-harming. This is not a completely accurate statement, but for the time being, let us go with it. Next, I want you to know that confessions are a type of admissions. What was the difference between admission and confession? Well, we'd just seen that confessions are also self-harming, and that is the similarity, but they are more harming than admissions. So admissions are self-harming and confessions are more severely self-harming. Let us go ahead and see this in a little more detail. To clarify this point, I will show you this diagram once again a little differently. So statements can be either self-serving or self-harming. Self-harming statements, we are dealing with admissions. And it is important for you to know that admissions are a wider term than confessions, which means admission basically includes both admission and confessions. I hope the point is now clear. Let's go ahead and also see it along with the relevant provisions of the Indian Evidence Act. So we know that relevancy is dealt with in Chapter 2 of the Indian Evidence Act that extends from Section 5 to Section 55. Within this 5 to 55, you have 17 to 31. As you can see, it lies within 5 to 55. 17 to 31 deals with admissions, right? And then we look one step further inside and we find sections 24 to 30, which deal with confessions. So as you can see, sections 24 to 30 fall within admissions, which means whatever definitions can be given for admissions will also apply to confessions. Likewise, 24 to 30 also falls within 5 to 55, which means 24 to 30 also deals with the relevancy of confessions. So 17 to 31 basically deals with the relevancy of admissions and confessions. So we just discussed that statements can be self-serving or self-harming, right? And then we saw that admissions are self-harming statements and that confessions are more severely self-harming. Let us try to understand this by looking at this example. Let us say A is accused of the murder of B in Greater Noida on 25th of October at 8 p.m. So now A is the accused. Now let's look at the kind of statements that A can make. A could say that on 25th of October, he was in Great Britain, which means he's far away from this place. So if A is saying that he was not in Greater Noida and instead he was in Great Britain, then he has made a self-serving statement, as you can appreciate, because as a result of this, his interests are served, he appears not to be guilty, and therefore it is profitable and beneficial for him. Therefore, the first statement is a self-serving statement. Let us go ahead and see another example. Let us say A says that he was in Greater Noida on the 25th of October. Well, when he says this, then maybe one might think that he's in trouble. So to that extent, you can say that it is self-harming. Because if he was in Greater Noida on the 25th of October, well, he doesn't have a plea so strong to say that he has not done it. So it is self-harming. But I want you to wait one step more and have a look at this. Suppose A says that he killed B on 25th October. This also is a self-harming statement. But you see, it is more severely self-harming than the second statement. In the second statement, he has only said he is in Greater Noida. Now, tens of thousands of people reside in Greater Noida. That doesn't mean that each one of them has killed. So, A, when he says in the third sentence that he's actually killed B, he has made a much more severely self-harming statement. To give you the terms, the second statement can be called an admission and the third statement is a confession. So this self-harming statement is an admission and this would be a confession. So a confession is basically an admission of guilt. Because as we know, a confession is also an admission, but it is a more strict, it's a more self-harming form of an admission. I would now like to show you some of the differences and similarities between admissions and confessions. Okay, so admissions are self-harming statements and they are applicable to both civil as well as criminal matters. And it is important for you to know that not all admissions are confessions. We just saw the diagram. So if this is admissions, then confessions lie inside. So as you can see here, these are admissions that are not confessions. So it can be said that not all admissions are confessions. Now let us look at confessions. Confessions are basically admissions, but admissions of guilt. So when a person admits that he is guilty, that admission is basically a confession. It's important for you to know that confessions apply only to criminal matters. So most of the provisions of the Indian Evidence Act apply to both civil and criminal matters. However, there are a few provisions that apply only to civil and a few others that apply only to criminal. So the provisions relating to confessions apply to criminal matters only. And then of course we'd seen that all confessions are admissions. So the smaller circle in here, as you can see, all the confessions are admissions. Therefore, when we say that admissions extend from section 17 to 31 and confessions from 24 to 30, it means that the rules that are applicable to admissions are also applicable to confessions. So if there's a rule given for admissions, then that rule also applies for confessions. It's important for you to remember this. Now you might perhaps be wondering as to why this distinction between self-serving and self-harming statements had to be made. So let me give you a little test. Let us see what you believe. First, I make a statement that I am very intelligent, okay? Or I say that I have never violated any law. On the other hand, I make another kind of statement that, I've always been very bad at maths, or that I have served 2 years in prison for having committed theft. Which one do you find yourself believing? When a person boasts about himself, when a person speaks highly about himself, we tend not to believe it. But when a person makes a statement that goes to his own detriment, then we tend to believe it. And therefore, it is that spirit, it is that sentiment which is encapsulated in the provisions relating to admissions and confessions. There is a tendency to believe people when they make self-harming statements. As we conclude this lesson, I would like to give you a little exercise. Okay, so we're talking about self-harming statements, the admissions. Now we saw that this lies between sections 5 to 55. And we'd seen that the provisions between 5 to 55 either declare a certain fact to be relevant or they declare them not to be relevant. So what I want you to see is, by looking at the sections from 17 to 31, have a look at all of the sections and see as to which of these provisions declare something to be relevant and which ones declare something not to be relevant. Also, I want you to see one more thing. If you remember, I had said in the lesson some time back that my diagram was not 100% correct. That is because admissions mostly are self-harming. However, in some situations, in some exceptional situations, even self-serving statements can be made admissible. So what I want you to do is that I want you to see as to which provision tells you the conditions in which admissions can be made despite being self-serving. So I'll repeat the question for you. We'd seen that admissions are required to be self-harming. However, in some exceptional situations, even self-serving statements can be relevant as admissions. I want you to tell me as to which provision lets you know this. So I hope this lesson was of use to you and you learned something from this. Thank you so much for your patience. Good day.